Hello and welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty, streaming online at foxnews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano, here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. Here we go again. When FDR and the Congress in the 30s severely limited the activities of financial institutions, it killed jobs, raised the cost of borrowing money, and extended the duration and the depth of the Great Depression. Apparently, the Obama administration simply doesn't understand the hard lessons of history and is utterly wed to the false premise that the government must appear to be doing something to false enemies so as to give the false hope that whatever it does will somehow lift the economy. In reality, the government should simply suspend the collection of income taxes for a year, encourage savings, and let the free market alone. Then the GDP will soar and unemployment will sink like a rock. Joining me now is Thomas E. Woods, author of 9 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers, the latest of which is Meltdown, a free market look at why the stock market collapsed, the economy tanked, and government bailouts will make things worse. Tom, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
So the government, in my view, has a couple of goals here. One is to demonize the banks, to sort of take people's angst off the government, which is where it should be. And the other is this egalitarianism. You know, we'll pull down the rich, the people who provide jobs, so we can uplift the poor. Question: what will happen in the economy if the government extracts billions from banks?
Well, I mean, part of me feels like they deserve it, after all they've done to us. But I think it's another example of the federal government getting us off the track and pointing us in the direction of red herrings, basically. This is another example of what they constantly do. They always divert attention from themselves. All these crises are always caused by boogeymen that everybody hates, and we've all been taught to hate, and they want to punish them. Now, at the same time, well, first of all, let me point something out with regard to all this, because one thing we hear, I was just in Texas at an event, oddly enough, sponsored by an organization that Phil and Wendy Graham chair, and I'm not very close with those folks, but they invited me to speak all the same. And Phil Graham authored a piece of deregulatory legislation in 1999 that Obama now is implicitly pointing to as really being the culprit here. And what we hear an awful lot about is the alleged repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act of the 1930s. And I hope I can have just a couple minutes just to explain to people what this actually is.
Do that, Tom. Tell us what the Glass-Steagall Act was and the harm that it caused, and the freedom that was unleashed when it was repealed, and what the Democrats want to do because they're looking for a boogeyman yet again.
Right, because this is, you're going to hear this constantly, and I think it's important to understand what exactly it is and what it isn't. In the 1930s, there was a distinction made, and it could maybe be a sound one, between commercial banks and investment banks. A commercial bank is a bank that lends money to you. You make deposits in it, like any average person would interact with. An investment bank trades in securities. It doesn't accept deposits. And that was a distinction that Glass-Steagall wanted to make. And this was right around the time that deposit insurance was later being introduced. Commercial banks will be covered by deposit insurance. Investment banks that are engaged in much riskier activities will not. And so we're going to make a clear distinction between the two. Okay. Now what's been done in 1999, a lot of people think that Glass-Steagall was repealed and that now your local commercial bank can trade corporate securities or securities of whatever kind. That's actually not the case. Glass-Steagall simply said the following few things. Investment banks can't take deposits. Banks, commercial banks, cannot trade in or underwrite securities with a few minor exceptions, and commercial banks can't be affiliated with any firms that do those things.
But the whole concept of the government doing this is a political ideology being injected into the economy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if there weren't a too-big-to-fail guarantee and if there weren't deposit insurance, it wouldn't matter how these institutions wanted to organize themselves. This one having this one having that, wouldn't matter. But the argument is that once we're going to regulate this whole sector, we're going to get to determine who gets to do what.
But how wrong is the government to say that the problems we have today are caused by too little regulation rather than too much, when it is the government itself which encouraged and rewarded reckless behavior on the part of the banks? Just take Fannie and Freddie alone, which assumed trillions in bad debt.
Right. No, this is absolutely all true. The government, I've been making a small career out of making this point, that every aspect of the crisis has the government's fingerprints on it, but that here they're trying to say, or the conventional wisdom is, you even hear this in the New York Times, that because of deregulation, suddenly banks can engage in risky mortgage-backed securities trading, and that's what got them in trouble. No. What got them in trouble was they made bad loans. They did things that banks do. They did not get in trouble because your commercial bank down the street became an investment bank. The so-called repeal of Glass-Steagall did not touch those provisions. Commercial banks still cannot deal in or trade securities. They can buy them as investments as they could before.
And one of the reasons the banks made those bad loans is because the government either agreed to assume them or insured them. So, in other words, expose the taxpayer to the risk and the bad decisions of the bankers.
Exactly. So it's just like with this underwear bomber. You know, there are a couple days after that underwear bomber crisis hit, I heard stories of friends of mine who were in airports, and they were subject to all kinds of additional arbitrary humiliations, and they were showing their IDs like 7 times. And I said, well, okay, would any of that have stopped the underwear bomber? I mean, was it that he didn't show his ID? So in other words, it doesn't matter that it's not going to have any effect. They want to look like they're doing something.
Right.
And so with Obama right now and the whole Glass-Steagall thing, they're trying to make it seem like, aha, well, we're right on the case. Well, even if nothing had been touched in Glass-Steagall, the crisis would still have occurred just as it did, because you could still securitize. All the things that the investment banks did, they could have done then. All the things the commercial banks did, they could have done then. The whole thing, this new Obama proposal today, and the whole Glass-Steagall thing, it is all a giant red herring to divert attention from the real causes.
The real cause is government's big thumb on the scale of the free market. But if government can make people think it's the banks, and if government can overtax the banks, then the people will vote for that government. Even though the effect of this tax, Tom, and we only have a few minutes left, the effect of this tax will be to make it more expensive to borrow money. Thus, there will be more layoffs. Thus, there will be more unemployment, the opposite of what the government claims it wants to bring about.
Exactly. And so when these negative things occur, then there will be clamor for still more intervention to solve the problems caused by the original intervention. This is what Mises said, Ludwig von Mises, that when you have government intervention, it causes problems that then lead to calls for still more intervention. What we never think to do is, why don't we get rid of the intervention that caused the problem in the first place?
Absolutely. We're chatting with Tom Woods from the Mises Institute, who's the author of the bestseller Meltdown. What do you think of my suggestion about suspending the collection of income taxes for a year? Wouldn't that be a tremendous boon to the economy? Wouldn't that eliminate a lot of our woes almost overnight?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly think that the individual states, if the federal government is going to have the good sense to do this, when I was in Texas, I said Texas should just say, look, we're in a downturn, but Texas is going to make itself the best, friendliest, most pro-business state in the whole country, and you just watch what happens. Same thing would happen on the national level, which is why they'd never do it.
Right. Tom Woods, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
My pleasure, Judge.